Our resident lawyer, Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay, with us every Thursday. She's here to offer her legal expertise by providing some general advice on the latest of hot topics. She has experience that spans more than a quarter of a century in the area of property and commercial law. She also prepares wills as part of estate planning and litigation. She's with us, her happy smiling face with us this morning. Hello, Despina.
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning, Despina. Okay, so it has been a wild week. Obviously, we didn't get to chat and catch up with Talking Law last week because of the devastating floods. And one big thing that everyone's thinking about is insurance. What do we do? What can go wrong? What's the update?
Yes, so I first of all, I obviously feel very much so for everyone that's been affected by the floods in Queensland and in New South Wales. I think it's absolutely terrible, and hopefully they'll have brighter outcome in the near future for those people. So I thought it was quite timely that we talk about insurance and some different aspects of insurance that I think some people will be able to take some benefit from the segment this morning. So we're going to cover some things such as insurance issues under contract. So for anyone that is about to go under contract to buy a property, or anyone that is currently under contract, there are some things that even our clients have experienced up here in Queensland that has affected them recently from the floods. And there's always seems to be a flow-on effect. If you're not affected directly from the floods, you may be affected indirectly from the floods because you need to reach out to third parties to assist you to get pest and building inspections. There's going to be a backlog of that because those companies are affected by the floods and they're understaffed or their workers are stuck at home. So there's always going to be a flow-on effect somewhere along the way. So let's talk about, first of all, contracts. So in Queensland particularly, the general rule is that when you sign a contract to buy property, the risk in that property passes to you as a buyer straight away. So normally a buyer would have to take out insurance cover for that property from the time pretty much that they've signed that contract and they're bound to cover them for the whole contract period until the matter settles, if it does settle. So normally the seller, the owner, would retain their insurance in place, and that would be logical to do that. But the buyer has to take out their own insurance cover. Now, recently we've had some buyers in the last week or so that have come to me and said, look, I can't get insurance. I've spoken to a few insurance companies, they won't give me cover. And that could be for a number of reasons, not necessarily this particular buyer and this particular property. It might just be that the insurance companies are so overwhelmed with claims that they're not able to handle doing a simple insurance cover on a property that's not affected by floods. So you can see that that's an indirect effect someone's had from the flooding itself. So what I said to this person is, okay, well, you're already under contract. You came to us after you signed the contract. Why don't we approach the seller and say, let's shift the risk. Let's have the seller retain the risk. So let's vary the contract. So we attempted to do that. The seller wanted something in return, but in the end, we were able to do that. So my tip to people that haven't signed a contract yet is you might want to think about putting a clause in your contract to say the risk in the property stays with the seller, because the seller would have already had and still has their insurance cover. And you might find that it's more difficult for you as a buyer to actually get cover.
Yep. And of course, generally it's 6 weeks or so from the time when you first decide that you're going to buy somewhere to actually finishing the process. So obviously a lot can happen in that time, and these floods of recent weeks are a great example of that. So someone who might have started this process a couple of months ago suddenly finds that the floods have occurred in that time. So that really does change things, or it can change things dramatically.
That's right. So that's a little tip that I'm giving to people because they really need to think about that, that when they're buying property. And if they are under contract and you haven't been able to get that insurance cover, think about having your contract varied. The next thing is when you're going to go under contract to buy property, think about extending the time period for your finance and for your pest and building report, because the bank and the inspectors that have to come out on site to visit the property may also have delays because their companies are affected by the flooding directly or indirectly, and it's caused a backlog in their system. So that's what we're finding as well. We're finding that clients can't get their bank to go out and do a valuation or to find a building and a pest inspector to come out because they've got their own internal issues. So again, think about the timing of that before you go under contract. The other thing I want to mention with contracts is there is provisions in the Queensland REIQ contract that allows for suspension rights. So if you are under contract and your property has been affected by flooding, you have the rights to actually suspend the settlement obligations. So there are extensive provisions in there, and it's called a delay event. And usually those things are like property is damaged by flood, tsunami, cyclone, things like that. So you need to be aware of suspension rights, and you should talk to your solicitor about that if you're under contract and you've got some concerns or you are affected. And I suppose the other thing I do want to mention is a section in the Property Law Act, again, Queensland. There might be a similar provision in New South Wales. I didn't have time to have a look for everybody, but I know in Queensland there is a specific section in the Property Law Act, that's Section 64. And what that section says, and a lot of people may not be aware of it because there's not a lot of cases in play over the years that have actually used this section to get out of a contract. But what the section says is that if you are under contract for a home or a dwelling, which would include a unit as well as a house, where that property has been destroyed or damaged, so it's unfit for occupation. An example, by floods, right, that we've experienced recently, Queensland, New South Wales, we've seen it recently in Queensland, New South Wales. If you are under contract and that's happened and you haven't settled, you actually have a right to rescind the contract and get your deposit back. So it's a very, very important right that's given by legislation in Queensland, and it has been used previously with the 2011 floods in Brisbane. Some people were able to get out of their contracts using this particular section. So they're just some tips and helpful hints, I suppose, for buyers who are about to go under contract, who are under contract currently, if they are affected directly or indirectly from the recent flooding events in Queensland and New South Wales.
And some people may not be aware that some of these conditions and that get-out clause you mentioned there is actually available.
Well, that's exactly right. And this particular section I mentioned, the Property Law Act, not many people would be aware of it. And as I said, there's not many cases in Queensland that have been determined based on this section. But this section has existed in the Act for many, many years. And it's a very good section that can, for example, be used in recent times. If you are under contract, you were supposed to settle, say, in 2 weeks' time. What happened? A flood's happened and has caused damage or destruction to that property that you were about to buy. And you're going, oh, my goodness, do I have to still settle? I'm not really sure. I can't afford to. The property is damaged. Why would I have to settle? So there is provision in the Property Law Act that allows you to get out of that contract, get your deposit money back. And that's very important. And it's an easy section to use in that it's clear. The rights in the section exist. If you are in that situation, you should go talk to your lawyer who's representing you and say, we should invoke these rights immediately if they haven't done that already. So that's very, very important. And like I said, some tips about insurance generally and cover if you're about to go under contract or you currently are under contract, because there's nothing worse than being in a situation where you have an obligation to take out insurance, you can't take out insurance, and then subsequently that property is damaged. You have no right of claim with the insurance company because there is no insurance to claim on.
Pretty devastating. Well, that is Despina Priala. Thank you, Despina. And coming up next, we'll be talking about apartments, body corporate. What does your insurance include and what doesn't it include? That is coming up next on Talking Law. You're listening to Radio 97.